The corridor was narrow and dim, and the sound of Daniel's boots echoed against the metal walls as he walked. He kept his hand close to the grip of his sidearm, though he hoped he would not have to use it. The air smelled faintly of fuel and cold steel. The hum of the ship's engines ran like a quiet warning in the background, reminding him that he was far from the safety of home. The job today was simple on paper: escort the prisoner from the holding cells to the interrogation room and stand guard. But Daniel had seen the reports, and he knew this was no ordinary prisoner. She walked a few steps ahead, chained at the wrists, but moving with a strange grace that made Daniel uneasy. She was taller than him, and her skin had a faint shimmer. Under the pale lights, her hair hung loosely down her back, almost black, but with a strange metallic hue. Her kind were known across the sector for being born fighters bred for war. Their claws could rip through reinforced plating, and Daniel had no doubt she could end him before he could draw his weapon. The cuffs around her wrists looked strong, but he had seen enough in his years of service to know that chains did not make a predator safe. They turned a corner, and for a moment there was no one else in sight. The security cameras were still blinking red, but the space felt too quiet. Daniel's instincts prickled, and in that same breath, she stopped moving. Her head tilted slightly as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, without warning, she spun around, and in one smooth motion, her hand shot forward. The cold tips of her claws pressed against the side of his neck, and her grip tightened, pulling him closer until her eyes filled his vision. They were not like human eyes at all. The color was deep gold with a sharp black ring around the iris, and they locked onto his with a weight that felt almost physical. Her voice came low and quiet, but it carried a strange power. "I could end you, human, but tonight is different." The words were not rushed, not thrown out in anger, but deliberate, as if she wanted him to feel each one. Her breath was warm against his skin, and for a moment, Daniel could not move. His training told him to shove her back, to draw his weapon, to call for backup, but his body refused to act. There was something in her eyes, not just threat, but something else, something harder to name. She released him as quickly as she had grabbed him, turning away and continuing down the corridor as if nothing had happened. Daniel's pulse still hammered in his ears. He followed a step behind, this time with his weapon in hand. He did not speak, and neither did she. The only sounds were the soft thud of their boots and the hum of the engines above them. Interrogation room was bright and empty when they entered. Two more officers stood outside the door, and one of them gave Daniel a quick nod before activating the locks. The prisoner sat down in the single chair and folded her hands in front of her. The chains clinked softly, but she held herself with the poise of someone who was not at all concerned about her situation. The officer in charge began asking questions about her mission, her people, her presence near the colony, but she gave no answer. Her eyes did not even move to acknowledge him. Instead, she watched Daniel, and only Daniel, as if the others were not even in the room. After several minutes of silence, the commanding officer grew impatient. He leaned close to Daniel and spoke in a low voice. "She's wasting our time. Take her back to the cell." When they reached the holding area, she still did not speak. She only glanced at the guards, then at Daniel. As she stepped inside, the cell door closed with a heavy metallic thud. The other guards left for their shift break, but Daniel had been assigned to remain on watch. The hours passed slowly. He stood near the wall while she sat on the bench inside the cell, studying him without shame. It was unnerving, but after a while, he forced himself to meet her gaze. She smiled faintly, and it was not a warm smile. "You do not know what is coming, do you?" she said softly. Daniel did not answer. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "The night of storms is almost here. And when the sky bleeds, you will be the first to fall." Her words sent a chill down his spine, but he forced himself to scoff. "Sounds like a threat to me." She shook her head slowly. "No, human, it is a warning. I could have killed you in the corridor. I did not. Tonight is different. Tomorrow will not be." Daniel kept his face neutral, but his mind worked quickly. Was she playing a game? Was this some trick to make him let his guard down, or was there something more? She leaned back against the wall. Closing her eyes as if the conversation was over, Daniel watched her in silence. The hum of the engines and the faint flicker of the overhead light, the only sounds in the room. He could still feel the ghost of her grip around his neck and the memory of her words gnawed at him. He had been in dangerous situations before, but something about this felt different, and he could not shake the feeling that whatever she was talking about would soon reach him, whether he was ready or not the next morning. The colony's artificial lights brightened in slow pulses, marking the start of the work cycle. Daniel's shift had ended hours ago, but sleep had refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the alien's gold gaze and felt the cold edge of her claws against his neck. Her words had not left him. They rolled in his mind again and again like a tide that would not stop. The night of storms, the sky bleeding, the first to fall. He had tried to convince himself it was nothing more than intimidation. A prisoner like her had every reason to play with the mind of a guard. She was trained to read people, to twist their fears to her advantage. Yet there had been no malice in her tone, only certainty. That was what unsettled him the most. He walked into the security wing to start his new shift. The air smelled of cleaning solvent and faintly of burnt wiring somewhere. In the distance, the commander was in the control booth watching several screens, showing different parts of the colony perimeter. Heavy haulers moved in the distance unloading cargo while repair crews checked the defensive walls. It all looked normal. Commander looked at him without much expression. "You are back on prisoner watch. She has been refusing to speak to anyone else. She claims she will only talk to you." Daniel frowned and asked why, but the commander only shook his head. "Do not trust her. She will use any trick to get what she wants. Keep her in the cell, and keep your weapon close." Daniel made his way down the quiet hallway to the holding area. The cell door was still locked, and she was sitting in the same position as before, elbows resting on her knees, head lowered slightly. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she smiled in that faint way again, as if she had been expecting him. "I told them I would not speak unless it was you." Daniel stepped closer but kept a safe distance. "You said you had a warning," he said. "Speak now." She studied him for a moment, and then began in a voice that was low but clear. "My name is Raya. I once fought in the war against your people. I have taken lives of humans, and I will not pretend otherwise. But now, I am hunted by the same force that hunts you. The attack that will come to this colony is not from my people. It will be from your own." Her words struck him, but he kept his face unreadable. She continued, "A faction within your command has allied with mercenaries from a race you call the Varin. They will attack here tomorrow night and blame my kind. The treaty between us will break, and the war will begin again. They will use the chaos to seize control of this sector." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. "You expect me to believe that?" His tone was sharp. She leaned back against the wall and tilted her head. "Believe or not, it changes nothing. The attack will come. You will see the storm in the sky first. Then you will hear the thunder that is not thunder, and by then it will be too late." She paused, her gaze never leaving his. "If you want to survive, you will need me." The silence between them stretched. Daniel thought of her speed, her strength, the precision with which she had grabbed him the night before. He thought of how her eyes had not wavered once while she spoke. He did not want to believe her, because believing meant the people he served were not the people he thought they were. He left the cell without giving her an answer. In the security booth, he reviewed the patrol logs, the cargo records, the communications reports. Everything appeared normal, yet a part of him kept looking for something out of place, and finding nothing only made the unease worse. Hours passed. The colony moved through its daily cycle. Crews worked the mines, traders arrived with goods. Workers crowded the mess hall. Daniel watched the routine like a man watching calm water, while knowing something dangerous swam just beneath the surface. Near the end of his shift, he returned to the cell. She was still awake, still watching him. When he stopped in front of the bars, she spoke again. "Do you know why tonight was different?" Daniel stayed silent. She nodded slightly. Because I saw the fire in your eyes, the kind that refuses to be told what to think. I spared you because you may be the one human here who can see the truth before it is too late." Daniel did not answer, but something in her tone settled deep inside him. He found himself wondering what kind of truth she had seen, and why it mattered to her if he lived or died. He turned and walked away, but the weight of her gaze followed him. All the way down the hall. That night in his quarters, he sat at his desk staring at the dim light on the COM panel. He thought about sending a discreet message to a friend stationed in the outer defense towers to ask if they had seen anything unusual. But he knew messages could be traced, and questions could raise suspicion. He'd been warned more than once that curiosity could be dangerous in the military. Still, the thought of ignoring her warning felt wrong. His instincts had kept him alive before in hostile zones far from here, and those same instincts told him that something about her words was real. He remembered her saying the sky would bleed, and wondered what that meant. He wondered why she had not simply escaped in the corridor. When she had the chance, sleep never came. When the morning lights began to pulse again, Daniel was already awake, standing by the window of his quarters watching the colony stretch into the dusty horizon. The wind was rising, carrying fine grains of red sand across the landing pads. The storm season was close, and with it, perhaps the night she spoke of. He did not know if it would be her storm or theirs, but he felt it coming all the same. By the time Daniel reached the security wing again, the wind outside had grown stronger, and the air in the corridors carried the faint whistle of dust against the outer plating. Guards were restless that morning, some glancing at the outer monitors more than usual, but no one spoke about it. Daniel moved through the halls with a calm face, though his mind was far from calm. He had made a decision during the night. He needed to know if the prisoner's words were true. Raya was awake when he entered the holding area. She was standing this time, her hands resting loosely in the cuffs, her eyes fixed on him in the way that made him feel as if she could see through the skin and into his thoughts. He stopped in front of the cell and waited for her to speak. She did not. Instead, she watched him until he finally said, "You claim my own people plan to attack here. Show me proof." She stepped closer to the bars, her gold eyes never blinking. "Proof will not come to you in a neat report, human. It hides in what your leaders do not tell you. It hides in orders that move soldiers without reason, and in ships that leave without manifest logs. It hides in the whispers among officers when they think no one is listening. I cannot give you proof here, but you can find it if you choose to look." Daniel frowned and walked away, though her words followed him. He went to the command records room where all patrol and movement logs were kept. The officer on duty was an old friend named Holly, who greeted him without suspicion. Daniel made small talk while scanning the log screens. At first everything seemed routine. Something caught his eye. A patrol ship from the outer rim had arrived 2 days ago, but there was no cargo record and no crew list. The ship had left again before dawn with a different set of clearance codes than it had arrived with. He leaned closer to the screen, pretending to study a routine manifest. Holly noticed and asked if something was wrong. Daniel shook his head quickly and stepped back, but his mind was working fast. A ship with no records could mean smuggling or black ops missions, but it could also be connected to what Raya had warned about. He remembered her saying that the attack would be hidden in plain sight until it was too late later in the day. Daniel walked the outer perimeter under the excuse of checking the fence sensors. The red sky was hazy with dust, and the wind carried it in long sweeping waves. The defense turrets stood silent, their barrels angled toward the clouds. He noticed fresh tracks in the sand leading away from the maintenance bay toward the rocky hills beyond the colony. It was not unusual for engineers to inspect the turrets, but the tracks were deeper than a single small vehicle, and they led further than most maintenance trips should. When he returned to the security wing, Raya was waiting near the bars of her cell again. She looked at him as if she already knew what he had seen. "You are starting to see," she said quietly. Daniel kept his voice low. "Why warn me at all? Why not let it happen?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because I am tired of wars that serve only the powerful. My people are fighters. but we do not slaughter without reason. What comes is not war, it is a game played by men in shadow, and it will end. With blood that means nothing, she stepped back into the dim corner of her cell. The choice will be yours, human. That night, Daniel could not stop thinking about the empty ship and the deep tracks beyond the perimeter. The commander had dismissed him, early saying his shift would start later tomorrow, and though it seemed like nothing, Daniel could not shake the feeling that it was a way to keep him away from something important. He returned to his quarters, but the air felt heavy and close. He kept replaying the moment in the corridor when she could have killed him, but chose not to, and he wondered. Again, why near midnight he made a decision. He moved quietly through the service tunnels toward the comms tower, where all off-world transmissions were routed. The tower was mostly empty at this hour, just a single technician asleep at the console. Daniel bypassed the main floor and climbed to the upper relay level where the encrypted military logs were stored. It was a risk, but one he had taken before in other places for other reasons. He connected a portable reader to the console and searched the last 2 weeks of data. It was there he found the confirmation several encrypted orders had been sent from a high-ranking human officer to an unidentified recipient. The orders contained detailed maps of the colony layout, security rotations, and the timing of scheduled power cycles. The language was precise and cold, and there was no doubt that whoever received it would know exactly how to take the colony without a prolonged fight. The most chilling part was the sender's name. It belonged to one of the commanders Daniel had served under for years, a man he had trusted. Daniel disconnected the reader and stood in the dark for a long moment. He could not take the evidence to his superiors without being accused of treason. The moment he revealed what he had found, they would know he had accessed restricted files. His only choice now was to decide whether to act on Raya's warning. When he returned to the holding area in the early hours, she was still awake, sitting on the bench with her head turned toward the sound of his steps. He unlocked the outer door to the cell block and stopped just beyond the bars. Her eyes met his, and in the quiet she said simply, "You found it, did you not?" Daniel did not answer directly. Instead he asked, "If I let you out, will you help me stop it?" She gave a small nod. "The moment you open this door, our fates will be tied together." Daniel stood there with the keys in his hand, the hum of the engines and the faint whistle of the wind outside, the only sounds. He knew that crossing this line meant he could never return to the life he had known, but staying on the safe side meant letting the colony burn. His grip tightened on the keys, and his mind settled on a choice. The day began under a sky the color of rust. The wind had not stopped since nightfall, and fine red dust coated every surface. Daniel moved to the security wing with the weight of his decision heavy in his chest. He had not slept, but his mind was clear. Raya's words and the evidence he had seen had burned away any hesitation. The commander was already in the control booth, studying the outer perimeter feeds. Several screens flickered with interference from the storm. Outside the colony walls, the sand swirled in long spirals like smoke from unseen fires. Daniel kept his voice steady when he reported for duty, but the commander gave him an unreadable look and said he was being reassigned to internal patrol for the day. It was a simple order on the surface, but Daniel could see the intent behind it. They were moving him away from the perimeter and away from the chance to witness what was coming. Spent the morning walking empty corridors and storage bays. While his thoughts stayed on the cell block, every sound of wind against the walls made him glance toward the outer doors. By midday the storm had grown darker, and the light filtering through the high windows had turned a deep blood red. The air inside felt close and charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. His patrol shift ended. He went straight to the holding area. Raya was standing by the bars watching him. In silence, he stepped inside the guard station and closed the door behind him. The corridor outside was empty. He walked to the cell lock and took out the keys. His voice was low. "You said once I open this door, our fates are tied together. Is that still true?" She nodded slowly. "I will fight beside you, but I will not be chained to your command." We stand as equals, or not at all. Daniel turned the key, and the lock clicked open. Raya stepped out with the smooth, controlled movements of a predator. Freed from a cage, she rolled her shoulders once as if loosening muscles held too long in place, and then fixed her gaze on him. "Where do we start?" He told her about the encrypted orders and the maps. He told her about the commander's betrayal, and how the attack would use the storm as cover. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Then we must reach the control tower before they shut it down. If we can hold it, we can send a signal to the outer defense fleet." They moved quickly through the lower maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main corridors. Daniel kept his weapon ready, while Raya moved ahead with uncanny awareness, pausing before each corner, as if she could sense what lay beyond. Twice she stopped him just before patrol units passed within meters of their hiding place. The further they went, the louder the storm became, until the walls vibrated with its force. Halfway to the tower, the first alarm sounded. The sound was sharp and urgent, rising above the roar of the wind. Daniel recognized it instantly. The perimeter had been breached. A deep thudding followed seconds later, the unmistakable sound of heavy weapons firing. Raya looked at him without fear. "It has begun." They ran now, moving fast through the winding halls, past fleeing civilians and soldiers, scrambling to form defense lines. Daniel's earpiece crackled with fragmented orders, but he ignored them. He knew those orders came from the same men who had invited this attack. As they neared the tower, an explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. Dust fell from the ceiling, and lights flickered. Daniel grabbed a railing to steady himself while Raya pressed forward. Around the next bend, they saw the first wave of attackers. They were not her people, but tall, thin figures in dark armor, with weapons that spat streams of white fire. The Varen, she moved without hesitation, closing the distance. Before they could react, her claws flashed and two fell in seconds. Daniel fired at the others, his shots cutting through their armor. The hallway filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and the sound of their boots pounding forward. They reached the base of the control tower, only to find the inner door sealed and guarded by 3 human soldiers in colony uniforms. Daniel recognized one of them from his own unit. The man raised his weapon and shouted for him to stand down. Daniel saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but also the resolve beneath it. These men were loyal to the traitor commander, not to the colony. Daniel fired first. The blast caught the guard in the chest, and he dropped. The other 2 moved to fire, but Raya was already among them. Her claws struck with precise, deadly force, and the fight ended. Almost before it began inside the tower, the air was heavy with heat from the failing systems. The hum of the generators was uneven, and the main console showed multiple red alerts. Raya moved to the window, scanning the storm outside. Flashes of light cut through the swirling dust as weapons fire lit the horizon. Daniel approached the console and began entering the override codes he still remembered from his earlier posting here. Each keystroke felt like it took longer than it should. His hands were steady, but his thoughts raced. If they could send the signal now, the outer fleet might arrive before the attackers overran the colony. Through the window, he saw the defensive lines beginning to break. Figures moved in the red haze, both human and alien, fighting in the chaos. The storm howled so loudly now that even inside the tower he could feel it pressing against the walls. Then the console flashed green. The array was online. He started transmitting the distress signal, along with all the data he had stolen from the encrypted orders, so the fleet would know exactly who was responsible. Raya stood beside him, watching the screen. The moment the signal went through, she turned toward the stairs below. "More will come for us now. They will not let us hold this place for long." Daniel checked his weapon's charge and gave a sharp nod. "We hold until the fleet arrives, or until we fall together." Sound of boots on the stairs echoed upward. They took positions behind the console, facing the door. The first attackers burst in moments later, and the tower filled with the blinding light of weapons fire and the tearing sound of claws through armor. Daniel fought with the calm focus of a man who knew there was no going back. Raya moved like a shadow in the storm, each strike deliberate and final. They fought not for trust, not for alliance, but for survival outside the storm raged and the sky glowed as if lit by fire. The night she had spoken of had arrived, and Daniel understood now what she meant when she said the sky would bleed. Control towers shook under the force of explosions from outside. Every impact rattled the metal frame and made the floor vibrate. Daniel could feel the strain in his arms as he kept firing shot after shot into the doorway. Raya fought beside him without pause, her claws a blur of motion, cutting through armor and weapon alike. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and the sharp tang of blood. The storm outside roared so loudly, it was as if the world itself was tearing apart more. Attackers pushed through the door, each wave more determined than the last. Daniel's shoulder burned where a blast had grazed him, and his breathing came fast and harsh, but he refused to fall. He saw Raya take a hit to her side, yet she stayed upright, her movements fierce and precise. For every step the enemy took forward, they paid for it with their lives. The console behind them continued to flash as the distress signal repeated again and again into the void of space. Through the narrow window, Daniel caught sight of something in the storm, a faint line of lights moving in formation. He blinked against the swirling dust, but the pattern was clear, ships closing in, fast and steady like a blade through water. The outer fleet had heard the call. Relief surged in his chest, but he knew they still had to survive long enough for the fleet to break through the enemy lines. The attackers seemed to realize it too. Their push grew more desperate. One managed to close the distance between them and Daniel, only to be struck down by Raya. Before his blade could fall, she moved to stand between Daniel and the next attacker, her claws dripping dark blood. She looked over her shoulder briefly, and in her voice there was no mockery now, only a fierce certainty. Hold the line a little longer, human, and you will see why I said tonight is different. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The room became a battlefield littered with fallen soldiers, both human and alien. The storm outside carried flashes of light, not just from weapons on the ground, but from the skies above. The fleet had arrived. The sound of heavy bombardment rolled through the storm, shaking the tower in deep, powerful waves. Daniel knew the enemy would not hold against such force for long. The next wave of attackers never came. Instead, there was a sudden silence, broken only by the howl of the wind and the low hum of the console. Daniel lowered his weapon slightly and exchanged a look with Raya. She stepped to the window and watched as the enemy forces began to retreat, disappearing into the red haze of the storm. Sight of them withdrawing felt unreal after the endless push of the battle, but the truth was plain. They had lost the chance to take the colony. A voice crackled through the comm system, identifying itself as a captain from the fleet. They had received the data and were moving to secure the colony. The traitor commander's name was spoken without hesitation, and an order was given to place him under arrest. Daniel felt a cold satisfaction at hearing it. Justice had arrived faster than he had dared hope. He turned to look at Raya. Her breathing was steady, though he could see the wound in her side was deep. Blood, dark and almost black, seeped between her fingers, yet her expression was calm. She met his gaze, and for the first time her voice softened. You could have left me in that cell, and none of this would have happened. You chose another path. Daniel stepped closer and shook his head. I only saw what was right, and followed it. She gave a faint smile. You remind me of a human I once knew long ago who showed me mercy when I expected death. I thought I would never see that again before he could reply. She moved toward the stairs. Daniel realized then what she intended. She would not stay for the fleet to arrive. They would see her as an enemy, no matter what she had done today. He followed her down the tower and into the maintenance tunnels where the storm's howl was muted. She stopped at a junction and turned to him. This is where we part, human. The path I take is not yours. Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest, but he nodded, understanding the truth of her words. She reached up and unclipped a piece of her armor, a small insignia marked with the crest of her people. She pressed it into his hand. Keep this as proof of what happened. Here, If anyone doubts you, tell them to find me, and I will tell them myself." With that, she stepped back into the shadows of the tunnel and was gone. Daniel stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of the insignia in his palm. Then he turned and made his way back toward the control tower, where the fleet soldiers were already securing the area. The storm began to ease as the first light of morning filtered through the thinning clouds. The air was still heavy with the smell of battle. But the colony stood, and the people within it were alive. In the days that followed, repairs began, and the traitor commander was taken away. Under heavy guard, Daniel gave his report in full, though he kept certain details to himself about how exactly the signal had been sent and who had fought beside him. The insignia stayed in his quarters, hidden away from prying eyes. At night he would sometimes take it out and turn it over in his hand, wondering where Raya had gone and whether their paths would cross again. For now the war had been avoided and the colony was safe. But Daniel knew the peace was fragile. The stars were full of threats, and not all of them came with warning. Still, he also knew that somewhere out there was an ally who had once been an enemy, and that thought gave him a kind of hope he had not felt in a long time. The night of storms had come and passed, and tonight had been different, not because of the battle won, but because two enemies had chosen to stand together, and in doing so had changed the course of what was to come, the end.